Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Health Bridge Podcast. I'm your host, Holly B. I'm thrilled to have Elwin Robinson back on the podcast. We had a podcast several months ago in which he was discussing his company, Genetic Insights, and how genetic testing can be a huge missing part of your health journeys. If you are struggling with different symptoms, whether they be physical, autoimmune symptoms, chronic health issues, mental health issues, relationship issues, things like that, and you aren't finding the answers that are really bringing you relief, getting your genetics test done can be very instrumental in leading you to other answers that you might have missed before or your other practitioners have missed in consulting with you. So this time I'm bringing him back on to go over my genetics test, which was a little nerve-wracking at first, but I decided, you know what? There's no reason to not be transparent here. You guys get to hear all about my struggles. And so I figure as a health coach, it's really great to be very transparent with my listeners and with my clients. And I strive to be transparent in what I do. So why not just open up the doors here and let you guys in? So this is a long episode. We go over a lot. So there are plenty of different categories within the genetics insight testing. We are going to go over personality types. We are going to go over gut health, allergies, nutrient deficiencies. We discuss autoimmunity and predisposition for that. We talk about some of the things that run in my family and if they aren't indicated in my genetics test. And there's a lot of interesting tidbits that will help you despite this being specifically about my testing. I thought it would be very beneficial for you guys to take a look and see what this testing looks like and how it might benefit you to know these things and to also be able to present different practitioners with this information so they can also better help guide your health journey. Again, this is a long episode. Feel free to look through the timestamps if you don't have time to listen to all of it and click on the topics that might be more relevant to you. But it's definitely worth listening to the entire thing. Make sure you check out at the end of the episode or in the show notes. Elwin is generously giving you a 25% discount to order your own genetics test. They are already very well priced to begin with. And also, I can't remember if you mentioned this in the episode, but if you already have done genetics testing through like Ancestry.com or something like that, and you already have those results, you can, for an even lesser price, just upload those results to the website and they can use those results to get all your tests done for you. Without further ado, let's dive right in to this episode discussing my genetics. Elwin Robinson, welcome back to the Health Bridge Podcast. I'm really excited to do a follow-up episode with you after our first one where we were discussing your company Genetic Insights and how understanding how genetics can play a huge role in figuring out why you aren't healing or figuring out what your health blocks are. We're going to do something a little different today, and we're going to go over my genetic test. So
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being willing to share your personal genetics publicly. I mean, obviously I do it on my show, but I know a lot of people are very wary to do that. So I really appreciate the transparency with your audience, and hopefully we'll make it interesting and entertaining for them whilst respecting your privacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think at first I was like, let's see what it says first. But after thinking about it, it's like, I'm on this public platform and I'm here to help people. And if we can use my test as an example of how people can learn more about their health journey, then let's roll with it. Even if it calls me out on some bad habits.
The good news is it absolutely won't and can't do that. So all that we're sharing, I think we did this in the previous episode in more detail, so I'll just do a very quick recap. All these is genetic tendencies, right? So nothing is written in stone. Just because it says you have a higher risk of something doesn't mean you'll ever have it. just because it says that you don't have a high risk of something doesn't guarantee that you won't have it as well, because lifestyle and environmental factors can still make that issue manifest for you. And obviously some issues they have a strong genetic component, and some issues have a very weak genetic component. And a lot of the reports, the things that we deal with are kind of in the middle, maybe where there's a 40 to 50% chance of, 40 to 50% role that genetics have. But obviously environment still plays a role. And I do talk to a lot of people like yourself who are health teachers, who've maybe been trying to have a healthy lifestyle for a long time. And I have to say, I'm always delighted to do it, but the genetic insights are always the least accurate with your category of people, because you dedicate so much to your health generally, you often haven't manifested a lot of the things that a person would otherwise manifest. When I speak to quote unquote normal person, usually by the time they're in their late 30s or their 40s, they've often manifested a lot of their highest risk health issues. But when I speak to a health teacher of the same age range, a lot of the time they haven't manifested a lot of their higher risk categories of issues because they've been looking after themselves. So it's just a test. And a lot of the time they're really following the recommendations in the reports. They've been doing it for years and years before they even obviously found genetic insights. It just goes to show that nothing's set in stone, and that through your own dedication to your health and all the rest of it, you can override a lot of genetic stuff.
There's so much that I want to dive into on this, because first of all, let's just say when I first got my genetic test back and I opened it up, I mean, you already said there's like 500 different reports. It's overwhelming. There is a lot of information in there, and there's a lot of like red, like high risk categories. And my immediate thought, and probably just because I was maybe tired and already overwhelmed when I opened it up, was like, oh my God, I'm wired for failure. So can you start with that and just kind of explain to people, like, if they get a genetic insights test, and what's kind of the first steps of how they should mentally prepare for what they're going to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I just first of all say, if you are, then we all are, because I've never met anyone, no matter how healthy they are, that doesn't have a very big list of red issues first. Because as you say, there's 500 reports and there's 3 options: high risk, low risk, or medium. Then by definition, almost everyone by the law of averages is going to have over 100 high risk reports. We do currently sort that by highest risk first. And so, yeah, the first thing I recommend is when you get the email telling you your results already, click on the video that tells you to watch it first to get the instructions of how to go through it, because that would give a lot of guidance about this. A lot of people miss that, I understand, because they're keen to just see the results. But that, as you just said, it's worth clicking on that video. I think it's 10 minutes or less, that just gives you a little guide and tells you how to look through things, not get overwhelmed. So I guess that would be the first thing. And then second of all, yeah, I guess that's why I just said everything I did in the first 5 minutes about just because you have a risk of something doesn't mean that you're necessarily ever going to get it. That's crucially important to understand. And the last thing would be, I would strongly encourage everyone to sort by category. So as a default, it's set to just show you all the reports, because I couldn't really decide which category should be a default otherwise. Like, should it be digestion? Should it be anti-aging? But what if you're not interested in that? So I just kind of give all of them. But I think we might change that, because as you say, it's so many that the person gets access to right from the gate. And so, yes, does that answer that question?
Yes. Yeah. I just really wanted to kind of hammer that point home of like, don't worry, this isn't a death sentence. This is just information, right?
I think it's a crucial point that you're bringing up, because I think that's the number one reason actually that most people don't do it, because we prize ourselves on being the very, the most accurate information. I don't think anyone disputes that. We pride ourselves on being the most affordable. I don't think anyone disputes that. So what other objections are there really to trying it? And I think it is mainly is like, people have an attitude of, I'd rather not know something bad. And there is some validity to that. There is the placebo effect, and there's also the nocebo effect. And the nocebo effect says, if you get told, like, let's say you go into a doctor and you think everything's fine, and they tell you you've got this serious disease, a lot of people will go downhill really fast. And then maybe a doctor will call or tell them a month later, actually, we made a mistake with your test. There's nothing wrong with you. But they went downhill because they believe that there was something wrong with them. That effect is powerful. And for some people, it's more powerful than others. And there's a genetic component to that too. And we can talk about maybe why you had a more negative reaction than some people. It is actually indicated in your report somewhere. But overall, I understand that it's human nature to kind of, I think the majority of people will focus more on the problems than the good side. And in fact, actually, when I prepared for this episode, I put together a handful of random reports that were like some of the gifts that you have genetically, which I think it's like a good thing to start with that.
Awesome. Let's dive in.
Okay. Like I said, this is just a random sampling. So it certainly is not, what's the word? Like encyclopedic or anything, but these are just some of the things that jumped out at me in the 20 minutes or so I had to prepare beforehand. So the first one I saw is inflammation. And so
let me just jump in really quick to let people know if they're just listening to this on an audio platform. If you jump over to the YouTube platform, we're sharing screen right now, so you can actually see what my reports look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, so this is like what you first log in. When you first log in, this is what you see. It's just basically a list of reports with a name and a risk score and then a download button. And then when you download one of them, you end up with a report like this one that I was just showing here. So this is interesting because you shared previously that you had an autoimmune disease. I don't know if you've ever had your CRP tested, but this is one of the most common blood markers for inflammation. And it says that genetically you actually have a lower than average risk of having that elevated. There is not a genetic predisposition to have chronic inflammation, which is a very good thing because, of course, we know that chronic inflammation is a major contributing cause to all kinds of diseases like heart disease and all the rest of it. That's a pretty good one. I don't know if that's something you ever had tested, if you can tell us if that's accurate or not, or is it normally low or high or?
Normally low. I'm getting it retested next week, I think, so I can report back. But yeah, it's normally pretty low.
Okay, so there you go. So I guess that first one that I picked randomly is accurate in practice then, so that's nice. And we can see it says here that this evaluation was based on 9,023 genetic variants. It also says that about 40 to 50% of the difference in people's CRP levels are maybe due to genetics. I mean, we have to say maybe, but that's roughly what it is. About half of it is absolutely due to lifestyle, what you eat, how much you move, your stress, and all the rest of it. But a significant amount is what you're born with. And so you've got that on your side. It's more, your body is less likely to go into that chronic inflammatory state that would be picked up by that particular test. And it is a big deal because, as it says here, chronic inflammatory diseases are responsible for 3 in 5 deaths worldwide. So that is a big deal. That has a tendency to be low.
And I definitely I am very proactive in reducing inflammation through diet and lifestyle because of knowing that I have an autoimmune disease.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So this one jumped out at me. And so I don't know Holly very well. We've had a handful of conversations, but you've always struck me, Holly, as a very kind person. And it's funny, this kind of showed up again and again in various different ways in your genetics, that like kindness was a recurring theme. And when you have kind of one report that indicates that, it could be outweighed by a bunch of others, but you had kind of several that all seem to indicate that to me. So I'll share a couple of those with you. So the first one is this psychological trauma report. You can see this one's actually based on 443,000 genetic variants. So there's a huge amount of variants that have been weighed in order to come to this conclusion that you are in the bottom 15th percentile. And of course, this doesn't mean that you haven't had trauma in your life. That's not something that genetics would determine. Of course, that's based on your circumstances in your life, but it does mean that you are more resilient, like you're less likely to have gone into a state of PTSD or complex PTSD. It's like you're able to let it go, you're able to forgive, you're able to move on. And this is a hugely important skill, I would say. I think a lot more people than we recognize are traumatized, and trauma really informs a lot of how they live their lives and how they feel and the decisions they make and the relationships they're in and all the rest of it. And so this says at least, and again, 40% of it is genetic. So there may be environmental factors overriding this, but it says overall that you're able to basically heal and overcome if you have had traumatic experiences in your past. And this matters because PTSD is like a really good indicator for health issues. People with PTSD are more likely to be arrested, they're more likely to be imprisoned, they're more likely to die earlier, they're more likely to make less money. I mean, so it's sad that the people who are abused and traumatized like have all these worse outcomes, but it is what it is. This says that you have that strong genetic resilience to overcome that. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
It does, yeah.
So that's awesome. So that's something that potentially could even be inspirational to others. If you have had a traumatic background and yet you have overcome it, then often that can be inspirational. Next, I'll move on to this one, the anxiety report. And you can see here, this is based on 807,000 roughly genetic variants. Again, a huge amount of things. And I just mentioned those huge numbers to say a lot of other companies, they say, oh, you have a risk for this because there's like one variant, like MTHFR or COMT or something like that means this. So we calculate a huge amount of variance to come to this conclusion. And so there is something in another report that maybe counterweighs this a little bit, but it says overall that you are not an anxious person. And it's, as it says here, about 65%, maybe a little bit less, but something like 65% of anxiety is down to genetics. And like I know someone who's in the top 99 percentile, like they're the opposite end of you. And no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try and all of it, they just are anxious. They're just hypervigilant. Like it's very hard for them to relax and calm down. And you're kind of more on the opposite end of this coin to them. Like you are capable of relaxing. And is that accurate in your estimation?
Yeah. Yeah. I had somebody tell me I'm more chill than the Dalai Lama before.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it's probably more of I have a hard time getting like excited and having a lot of energy. Having that opposite end of the spectrum. I'm definitely more on the chill side.
Yeah. Fantastic. And we're saying there's been loads of scheduling issues with recording this, all thanks to me. And you just handled it in such a relaxed, no big deal kind of way. I was like, then when I open these reports, I'm like, wow, okay. And a lot of the time when people treat other people badly, it's because they feel bad themselves. And so this lack of trauma, this lack of anxiety, and then if I go on to the next one, in fact, I'll move that slightly, a lack of irritability. It also says you do not have a tendency to be irritable. In fact, with this one, you're in the bottom 4th percentile, so extremely low on that scale.
Explains why I've been successful in customer service most of my life.
Yes, 100%. Yes, yeah, like any kind of role where your job is to make other people happy and to look after other people's needs. It doesn't have to be a service role, though. It could be an entertainer or even a leader, just anything where making other people feel good is a prerequisite. You would tend to do well at, I would say. Mm-hmm. So again, based on a huge amount of genetic variance, so this is not a small sample size, and again, up to 60% of difference are related to genetics, so it's a significant genetic impact. So that's great. This is a really good thing, and anyone who's friends with Holly is probably a very lucky person. What else? Oh yeah, so let's move on to a health-related thing here. So there's a big argument these days in the health world, you probably see between what's the healthiest diet? And there's kind of 3 camps, right? There's low carb, keto, paleo, that kind of thing. Then there's actually people who are high carb, maybe fruitarians would be an example of that, bean diet, different high carb diets. And then there's a lot of people who are like in the middle. And they all have loads of research and theories to back up their point of view about why they're right and the other side or the other sides are wrong. But I think a big difference comes down to how well they can actually handle carbs genetically, because there is a variation. Some people are more descended from hunter-gatherers, which means that they would not do very well with a large amount of carbs, because hunter-gatherer, I mean, it depends a little bit about where on the earth they came from, but overall, hunter-gatherer cultures had less carbohydrates, because carbohydrates usually depend on agriculture, like growing grains, basically. And the other side, so there's a hunter-gatherer type, and then there's like what they call more the farmer type, which, as it says here, like started around 12,000 years ago, that people started doing more agriculture. They started growing more carbohydrate-heavy food, shifting to a more carbohydrate-heavy diet. And so there are some indigenous cultures now who are still hunter-gatherers, not very many. Were your ancestors quite recently hunter-gatherers, or were they quite recent? Have they been for quite a while farmers? I guess that's the crucial distinction, or eating the product of farming. And so in your case, it says, and it's only based on 1 genetic variant. So you can see some of them are based on 500,000, some of them are based on 1 with these reports. There's a full gamut there. But it says that you have a good response to carbohydrates. Like you can handle them okay. There's probably no point in you going on a ketogenic diet. In fact, it's probably going to make you feel worse, because carbs have a lot of benefits. They help to raise the metabolism. They're in one way the easiest source of fuel for your body to utilize, as long as you don't have a problem with it. And generally, to burn any fuel other than carbs as a primary fuel raises stress chemicals. Might be one small piece of why you're able to be relatively, as you say, like the Dalai Lama, because you can handle carbohydrates. It's okay.
Okay, well, it's good to know, because I've definitely have gone lower carb over the last few years, cutting them out completely for maybe 5 or 6 months, and I'm much more open to it now. I don't know if I get quite to a majority. I wouldn't say I have a high carb diet, but I've added some back in.
Mm-hmm. And did you stop for like an autoimmunity protocol? Is that where you reduce the carbs?
I actually I went more animal based and then all the way to carnivore to see how that affected my autoimmune and my inflammation. I dropped inflammation immediately. A lot of my gut problems got just completely cleared up. I had more energy than I'd had in years. Chronic fatigue is the main way I express my flare-ups. And that was great. But that was about 3 years ago, I started that. So over the last year, I've been a lot more lenient. I've been adding some more vegetables back in, adding more fruit, some rice and stuff like that here and there, and just kind of trying to play with it and see where I feel the best.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So that's a great example where your real life experience is contradictory reports. So in this case, I would say, so when it says that you can handle the carbs, that's mainly talking about from a blood sugar, insulin point of view. Obviously, if you have some kind of dysbiosis, which I think a lot of people have, especially in this day and age, and then if you cut out carbohydrates, the majority of people who have dysbiosis will feel better because they're not feeding whatever those organisms are. And then if they manage to bring those organisms down, suppress them through going on a very low carbohydrate diet, they often do find that the stress chemicals go up. In your case, you may not have noticed that because they tend to be low, but maybe over time you start to feel not as good, which is why the carbs crept back in. And so it sounds kind of perfect. You stopped it for a while in order to improve that digestive situation. As you said, now you can add in more carbohydrates and without it being a problem.
I would say there's still some digestive stuff that I'm trying to figure out, but yeah.
Okay, so that's more of an immune system thing. It's a tricky one, carbohydrates with people, because so generally, if you talk to like a normal medical doctor about carbohydrates, what they're going to be focused on is if you're going to get diabetes, right? So that's really more what this report is focused on. But yeah, there's definitely other reasons why you might want to avoid carbohydrates, and the issues with the organisms inside you eating them and creating more toxins that make you feel worse would definitely be one example. I do think that's a significant contributing cause to chronic fatigue. So the next good report I have, but the good news is once you clear all that up, you should be fine to have carbs. You're much less likely to develop insulin resistance and diabetes and stuff than someone who has the opposite genetics, which is good, right? Yeah. And again, don't take my word for that. It's good to test always, right? Do an A1C, do an insulin resistance panel, but because it's not 100% genetics, but this one is pretty strong. I very rarely see people with this genetic who develop serious blood sugar issues unless they really abuse it, unless they're really hammering the sugar for decades. So this one, creativity, predisposed to high creativity. So this is a nice one. A lot of success in life is about being able to imagine, visualize, create a new way of being, create something new, creating a business, creating a work of art, creating a new vision for yourself, new vision for the world, all that kind of stuff. I often look for that one. So it's saying you are more predisposed to creativity. Would you say it's accurate?
Definitely. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And then this one, I said about you being a kind person. So I've seen a few examples of that, like not irritable. But these are the most obvious examples. This is oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that is often called the love hormone. It relates to, it's highest in newborn mothers and newborn babies, helping them to bond with each other. But it is related to the ability to love, but also to feel loved. A lot of people, I have a few friends who have this opposite genetic to you, and they tend to be people who can never feel fulfilled. They never feel satisfied. Sometimes they're drug addicts, sometimes they're work addicts, sometimes they're sex addicts, sometimes they're this food addicts, but they're always addicts because they always have an emptiness that they're trying to fill inside themselves. And so you have the opposite. You actually have you are fulfilled according to this, or it's easy for you to get fulfilled compared to average, on average. And so probably even other people around you will feel that being around you makes them feel more full. You make people feel loved, you make people feel supported, whatever. It says here things like increased empathy, happier and more secure relationships, you're better at parenting, improved cognitive performance. It's not just about hard-based stuff. Oxytocin also increases blood flow to the extremities. So that's why it improves cognitive performance, better mood, lower odds of developing PTSD. So there's that theme again. Yeah, it's a very good thing to have high oxytocin. But like with so many things, when you've had it your whole life, you might not realize that it's like a gift that you've got. You might just think, what's wrong with these other people who are always like
get over it already. Yeah, that's come across my mind before.
So you can relate to that one? Like,
Yes.
It's easier than average for you to feel fulfilled. All right, awesome. And then there's one more. So have you heard of the big 5 from psychology? Like there's 5 personality traits that people have either one or the other, like extroversion, introversion is one of them, and agreeable, disagreeable. So I thought I'd just share those with you. These are all just in a summary report here. So it says of being agreeable or disagreeable, it says that genetically you have a high chance of being agreeable.
True. Definitely true.
And you talked about being good in the customer service role. Again, it's like an essential quality for the customer service role, but also it's an essential quality, I'd say, among actors, models, entertainers, like anyone where their primary thing is to have people like them. They tend to be high in agreeableness because it's kind of likability is another way of saying it.
Sure.
The challenge of agreeable people is they might sometimes just say things to make other people happy and then later like wish that they hadn't. So they can be a bit less honest, but not because they're necessarily trying to deceive anyone, just because they're trying to be nice. So next one, openness to experience. So you can either be open to experience or closed, essentially, and you're open. So this tends to mean that you're more likely to want to explore, both maybe travel the world, but also intellectually, you're happy to explore new ideas. You're more open to whether it's astrology, feng shui, conspiracy theories, like whatever, just new ways of looking at things and new types of people. You're less likely to be prejudiced or discriminate against people. You want to meet all kinds of people. You want to go all kinds of places. You want to have all kinds of new ideas. So does that one resonate?
Totally. Yeah. And that's why doing this podcast is such a treat for me, because I get to do that with so many different people. This is my 101st episode that we're recording right now. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah.
I just did my 101st week or so ago. What a coincidence.
Awesome.
Okay. Awesome.
Twinsies.
Sorry, I don't know. It's kind of trivial information, but yeah, it's weird. It's just I didn't know my podcast co-host pointed it out to me. So conscientiousness. So you can either be conscientious or you can be carefree. So conscientiousness kind of usually associated with like being disciplined, organized, hardworking. What I found with people who are carefree is not necessarily that they're not that, but the crucial distinction that I found is conscientious people tend to ask the question, what needs to be done? Whereas carefree people more ask themselves the question, what do I want to do? That's the crucial distinction. With the high level of agreeableness, you might well be focused on what needs to be done to help other people, to make other people happier, or the rest of it. So that might alter that somewhat, but it still indicates that you're more likely to do things because you want to, rather than because you have like a sense of duty that you should be doing them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you resonate with that, or is that not accurate?
No, I think there's some accuracy there.
Okay. I mean, as you say, doing a podcast is probably an example of that, but I would expect, given all the oxytocin, the agreeableness and all the rest, you might have been doing other stuff to make people happy as well to some degree.
Yeah. And that's a trait that I see as well in autoimmune people in general. Obviously, that's still a generality, but I find that we tend to put other people first and do all the other things before taking care of ourselves. And we're very agreeable. Oh, yes, you need that. Okay, I'll do that for you. And we run ourselves thin physically a lot.
And so that's more of a problem actually if you have this. So this is my opinion, but when I find that people have these personality traits and something else in them kind of goes against it, like for instance, someone I know well is highly disagreeable according to their genetics, but they're highly agreeable because of their upbringing. They're female, they grew up in a communist country, so basically shut up, do what you're told, like don't dare argue. And so they like, but so they're kind of agreeable, but they actually hate being agreeable. Like they don't really want to do it. Like they want to do what they want to do, and it creates a lot of friction inside themselves. And so there might be something a little bit similar here, that part of you just wants to do what you want to do and wants to be free of all these obligations to other people. Whereas if you had high conscientiousness, you would actually just enjoy doing what needs to be done, and you wouldn't feel like you were missing out. That's kind of the distinction that I would say.
Yeah.
Positive sides of this are carefree, is obviously these people have the potential to be more fun, more spontaneous. Generally, the life of the soul of the party and all that kind of stuff is the carefree type, whereas the boring, uptight, stick in the mud is more the opposite type. So it's not all bad being the carefree. Generally, they're more popular again. It says that you're more extroverted than introverted. I'm sure everyone listening already knows what that means. A crazy thing that I've found these days is almost no one I ever meet is willing to admit that they're extroverted. It's almost like something that you're not supposed to be. But I just think extroverted means that you enjoy being around people. And I don't know why people don't want to admit that. Some people do enjoy being around people. Some people prefer being in their own company. Both are fine. But this is saying that genetically anyway, you're more likely to enjoy being around people.
Interesting. Yeah, I tend to want to be by myself a lot. But I do enjoy people. I feel like I'm kind of like in the middle.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Maybe one we could say is inaccurate. I find that about 4 out of 5 of these accurate, not 5 out of 5, which is beyond probability, but it's because at most there's a 50% genetic component, so there's still an upbringing component. And then lastly, this one, neuroticism. So this is either sensitive or resilient. So this might be, you're not an anxious person, you're not an irritable person, but the way you said, like, you were like overwhelmed at all the negative stuff that first came up. The distinction that I see about neuroticism is, we said we both go on YouTube, like neurotic tendency is if you get 10 comments and 8 of them are really nice and 2 of them are nasty, you put 80% of your focus on the 2 nasty ones. That's kind of the neurotic tendency. Whereas some people, like if they're the opposite, they're like, oh, I'm just going to ignore the nasty comments. Like even if they had 8 nasty ones and 2 positive ones, they would like only focus on the positive, you know what I mean? Like, so I have that tendency as well genetically to have that sensitivity and to tend to overly focus on the negative. So despite your resilience to stress and not being anxious and all the rest of it, maybe there's a bit of a tendency there to focus on the negative according to this. What do you think?
It just it depends on the situation.
Sure.
I would say, yeah.
And you've got some things that kind of oppose that. So you've got a little bit, what's the word? Like a bit of a conflict between different elements of you in that way. So that neuroticism, I think, is quite blunted by all the rest of it, the low anxiety, the high agreeableness, the high oxytocin, the low irritability. But it's still just I'd say it's probably more of maybe a mental tendency maybe sometimes to look at the negative. But obviously it's not like devastating for you or anything.
Yeah. It's also something that I've worked consciously on correcting, I think. So I'm much more aware of where my focus goes and what my words and my thoughts are around things, and to shift it so that I don't really go down that spiral too often. Not saying I never do. Still human. Always a work in progress. I can halt it a lot faster than I used to.
That's good, but yes, that's growth beyond it. Like some people are the opposite. One person I know well, they just are incapable of taking negative feedback. It's like it doesn't even exist for them. It's just water off a duck's back, and it's almost like it's bad. It's like sometimes you need to hear criticism, like you need to hear negative feedback, and it's like they're just completely oblivious to it. So that's kind of like the opposite extreme, where they actually have to train themselves to listen to negative feedback because it's alien to their kind of ways of doing things. But anyway, so that's fun. Obviously, if it only feels kind of partially accurate, it can be a little bit hard to kind of dismiss. Sorry, but easy to dismiss it. But I think as a mental exercise, it's good to take it on and go, okay, so those are my kind of pre-wired tendencies. Let me think how much I act in accordance with them. Let me ask myself, as you just said, like, have I evolved and grown beyond them and stuff like that? I think it's a fun exercise. But anyway, I guess the main thing we want to focus on probably is health and health issues. So should we get into that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, awesome. So I think the good news, okay, so this again could be construed as good news, could be construed as like the platform just isn't accurate. And I can completely understand if someone feels the latter way, but I don't really see a genetic tendency for autoimmunity. That's could be construed as bad news. In maybe you could just say, oh, the reports are wrong. And it could be construed as bad news if you're like, well, why have I got it then? But I actually like to see that as potentially good news, because what it means is if there's a genetic basis for something like lupus, it means that it's much more difficult to overcome it. And that is the kind of mainstream perspective on it, right? That there's no resolution, that there's no cure, that you're stuck with it and that's it. But if there is not a genetic basis, I feel more confident that the person's actually able to heal from it. So that's how I put it. I come across this much more commonly with food allergies, which is a much more minor form of autoimmunity, which I could talk about for a second. So when someone has an issue with a certain type of food, if I see it in their genetics, I say, okay, like, you hear with a higher risk of a peanut allergy, for instance, or lactose intolerance, if you have that, you might be able to eventually get so healthy you can have a bit of lactose, but you're probably never going to be drinking gallons of milk a day and feeling fine, because it's just not in your genetics to be okay with that. But if it's not on your genetics, I would say, but you have an issue of lactose, I could go, okay, maybe there's some kind of gut dysbiosis going on that's causing this particular issue, because it is a FODMAP, right? Maybe it's something else, but it's something that's actually potentially resolvable. So that's how I'd look at it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I actually have a question for you around the lactose, just to get your theory on it, because I haven't found anybody that's given me a theory yet, other than I've healed my gut to a certain extent. I had to cut out dairy completely back probably, I don't know, 25 years ago or something. Like cheese, no problem, but milk, any kind of dairy, desserts, anything like that, I couldn't do. Whipped cream on my pumpkin pie, that sort of thing. When I went carnivore or animal based, dairy is still allowed. And so I was starting to do a little bit of dairy when like making like a cream sauce or something like that. And I could tolerate it. And then I could tolerate more. And then I could tolerate more. Now I can actually have like a latte, like a matcha latte. I can do it with whole milk. And I don't have any immediate issues. Doesn't mean maybe there's still some residual stuff, but I mean, before I had gotten an accidental milk latte. This is probably 15 years ago, and was like stuck in the bathroom for over an hour dealing with that. You know what I mean? And I don't have that reaction anymore. And I'm just super curious if you have any insight on that.
About what could have caused you to get better?
Yeah. Is it just doing the animal based healed my gut enough to where I could tolerate it?
Yeah, I'd say that would be the potentially obvious explanation. Again, like I said at the beginning, like all of these are tendencies. When a person has this, like intolerant, I think you might only be the second person I met who said, actually, I can handle it just fine now. So it's not that common that a person does overcome it, but it does happen. And it's not just dysbiosis, it's also about the levels of good bacteria that are going on. And I think with lactose specifically, bifidobacteria is crucial. So is Akkermansia, because it eats up the mucus, which otherwise can get excessive. So my theory would be that despite that genetic tendency, you healed your gut enough and what does that mean? Reduced intestinal permeability, reduce the level of dysbiosis, increase the diversity, increase the levels of crucial positive bacteria that are often low or completely missing in a lot of people. And so therefore you can handle it again. I mean, basically, I think the genetic component to it is that the person with your genetics tends to not have the kind of bacteria that mean it's okay to have the lactose. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to recolonize. It just means that it's difficult and unlikely. But obviously, anything's possible. That's the crucial thing. So that's great. That's great you've overcome it.
Yeah, it blew me away. I just had met up with a childhood friend of mine, and we were getting together at a coffee shop, and I ordered my latte with milk. She's like, "You're drinking milk? Who are you?" But yeah, it's been an interesting thing to observe.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's probably your first source of carbs when you're on a carnivore diet as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe that's why your body adapted it. Like I said, the body kind of gets desperate for carbs after a while. Maybe your body was like, if this is the only time that she's going to allow, we're gonna find a way to make it
Right.
to get used to it. That's a silly theory, but who knows? So in terms of, I mean, you have like 13 red reports here in the categories of allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities. So even though you don't have that tendency for CRP, like we talked about earlier, there is a general kind of tendency for the immune system to be reacting to things, right? Maybe the average amount I see here is like 4. Oh, sorry, not 13, 11. But it's still pretty high. This one's interesting, the eosinophils. This is normally something that you'll see in a white blood cell count with like a standard doctor's test. And so I see this very commonly in people with allergies and in fact autoimmunity, but especially allergies. Do you by any chance remember if you've had that elevated before in a previous blood test?
I want to say yes, but I'd have to go back and look at it to tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. Really quick, Holly B here. I just wanted to interrupt the podcast to ask you for a quick favor. Can you take just a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening in on? It makes a world of a difference in the reach of this podcast. It takes like literally under 10 seconds. So go do that right now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, it's often referred to as eosinophilia. Dr. Miriam, MD, who I often partner with when I work with clients, her position on this is having anything above 0 is a sign of an issue and that you really want to get it down to 0. I think between 0 and 0.4 is like the standard, what they call reference range. But from her point of view, even mid-range is not good. You really want it to be a 0 because any elevation basically means that your immune system is reacting to things, that it is attacking your own tissues to some degree based on what it's finding. And so that can be helpful because you may know, no practitioner may point out to you that's an issue or something to work on. So if you do look back at your blood test results and you do see that these are elevated, that could be a thing where the more that you reduce them, the better you might find that you feel, because that is often what clients find. The other thing that raises the eosinophils is also parasites. And so some people, there's kind of a thing going on these days, you might have seen in the alternative health community, where people are claiming and believing that they're curing themselves of all kinds of serious health issues by taking antiparasitics like ivermectin, fenbendazole. And so there's potentially a theory that and including autoimmune conditions, and there's a theory that one of the reasons why that may work is because there's the theory, hidden parasites in the body. And then when you kill those with things like ivermectin, then the body's eosinophils calm down, and then suddenly the allergy goes away. Suddenly the autoimmunity goes away. So it's not something I'm advising to do, but something to look into. Are my eosinophils raised? Have I ever tried an antiparasitic protocol before? If not, why not? Let me just give it a go, see how I feel. For some people, it's revolutionary, and for some people, it's nothing. But it's pretty low risk. It's pretty safe if you do it the right way. And I wouldn't just recommend everyone does it. Like there are certain corners of the alternative health world where they say everyone needs to do parasite cleanse. I don't say that, but I would say if your eosinophils are raised, it's definitely worth considering, and you have that genetic tendency. So I've never actually met someone who has that genetic tendency who doesn't have some kind of autoimmunity of some kind, although to be honest, it is usually just allergies. So those jump out at me. And you said fatigue is one of the main kind of things that shows up for you first. Let's have a look at energy as a category, just while okay. Oh yeah, cortisol. Oh, and lactate. Interesting. Have you ever had your blood lactate levels checked?
I don't think so.
Does it show up as chronic pain as well, or is it just fatigue?
There is some pain. I'm not convinced it's related. Like, I feel like it might be different structural things, if that makes any sense. I do have some pain, but I wouldn't say I have like the standard chronic joint pains and stuff like that many do with autoimmune and lupus.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Okay, I just ask because the reason that lactate is here in the energy one is because when the body produces more lactate, if we go back to, if we think of exercise, right? Let's say you're doing a bunch of reps of something. So you're going to get to a point where you can't do another rep because you're having this burning and you're having this fatigue, and that's caused by lactate. And
so known as lactic acid?
Yes. Yeah. And so some people, that shows up first as fatigue. Maybe they don't have much pain. Some people it shows up as pain. They don't have much fatigue. So the experience of it can show up differently. And so the reason why chronic fatigue, which may not have pain, or the reason why fibromyalgia, which may not have fatigue, are still associated together, what is because ultimately they say it's a mitochondrial metabolic dysfunction. What does that mean? It means in the process of creating energy, your body is not going through the full Krebs cycle with creating the energy. So if your body is producing energy in the most efficient way possible, then the byproducts at the end are energy, ATP, water, and carbon dioxide, all of which are beneficial. But if your body is not very efficient at creating energy, then the byproducts are lactate or lactic acid, as you say. Some people, they perceive that more, it shows up as fatigue, and some people it shows up more as pain. And for some people, obviously both, but it could be one or the other. So that's why I asked if you have pain as well, because that would then be a classic presentation. This is something you can test. I think it's definitely something you can get a doctor to test, but I believe that these days you can even just get a finger prick test you do at home, like diabetics do, where it costs like 50 cents per test or something. It's something to consider next time you feel fatigued. Whip out one of those tests, just see if your lactate levels are elevated, because if they are, that gives you a huge clue as to what's going on and therefore what actually you need to do to resolve it. And something to support that theory is that you also have this one here, the more likely to have metabolic syndrome. So again, this is the classic cluster of things that includes increased blood pressure, higher blood sugar, insulin resistance, all that kind of stuff. But what it really boils down to, again, is mitochondrial dysfunction, which again is the same thing where because the body has some kind of issue with creating energy effectively, it then goes into this lower energy state. And when your body's in this lower energy state, what tends to happen is that all the functions of the body that are considered more secondary to survival start to function less well, and over time can develop malfunctions. So the parts of the body that the body considers essential functions, like the lungs, the cardiovascular system, the musculature system, certain areas of the brain, they tend to carry on working okay, although there may be fatigue, but they work. But then the immune system, the detoxification system, the hormonal system, especially like sex hormones, the skin, the digestive system, the systems that are more associated with the parasympathetic system will often start to suffer. And so that potentially could be something that's going on. Have you ever had like a mitochondrial test done to see how your mitochondria are functioning?
No.
Okay.
Is that something that you can get through regular blood work, or is that something that's kind of more of a specialty?
It's definitely more specialty. Yeah, that's more like a functional medicine doctor. I don't think a normal MD would ever do it. There are indicators of it, which more like a normal doctor thing. But I think this is often where people have things like chronic fatigue and they get all their blood test results back and they're totally fine. Right. And then they do a mitochondrial test and then it just shows like their mitochondria are on the floor and they're like, finally, something that actually explains why I feel like this, right? Because often people with fatigue, they look good, they seem fine, and people think that they're imagining it, right? Like I think don't a significant amount of MDs still think it's an imaginary illness or something like that. But yeah, the mitochondria definitely show that this is not accurate. If you actually look at the mitochondria of these people, they're almost always like, no wonder you're struggling, right? It's like, so I think it's, if you're in that position that I just said, where a lot of the obvious stuff doesn't seem to have answered the questions, then as I said, lactate is a simple, cheap, and easily available test to see if there's an indicator that mitochondria are not producing energy correctly. But it's not exactly foolproof. Probably like an in-depth one would be better. Now, the other thing, just to contradict what I said earlier, despite what I said about how you should be able to handle carbs, I suppose it doesn't contradict it. It does also say you have a tendency for hypoglycemia. Is that something you can relate
I
to?
used to get very hypoglycemic until
Okay.
I changed kind of how I ate in the morning, and it rarely happens anymore.
And do you mean you started eating in the morning?
Oh, I would eat, but I was raised on eating cereal,
Yeah, okay, got it.
fruit,
Yeah.
stuff like that, and carbs, bagels, and I would be shaking and, I mean, hangry. I probably traumatized my boyfriend when I would go through those modes. And yeah, so once I started actually focusing on protein and fats in the morning, that basically took care of itself.
Excellent. Yeah. And by the way, that's what I advise everyone. I've got an episode about it on my channel. Spoiler alert, it's basically eat soon after waking up, make sure you have plenty of protein and plenty of fat. That's the main thing, right? It's like 100% agree with you. So that's great. Again, you're really on top of that. Obviously, that could be another thing for people listening when they have fatigue. They're just blood sugar dysregulated and they don't even realize it a lot of the time. But I'm glad that you're already aware of that and on top of that. I might just skip to hormones as well and see if there's anything there that's very pressing. And I did download this report about the metabolic syndrome. So it is saying you're in quite a high risk bracket for that potentially. So I don't know. Yeah, it gives recommendations. I encourage everyone to read their recommendations on their own because there's not a huge amount of things that I can add to it. But yeah, I mean, these are all things, I wouldn't expect any of these readings to be massively off for you. This is often something that gets worse when a person's overweight, which you're not. So that's great. But the root of it, I understand to be mitochondrial dysfunction. That's why I would still be interested in testing that ultimately. Hormonal balance, high levels of cortisol, low levels of leptin, high levels of reverse T3. T3. Have you ever had your thyroid tested?
Yeah. They always say it's in the normal range. I think I'm usually on the low end.
Okay. And is that by a doctor who's a normal doctor, or is that a doctor who specializes in optimizing hormones?
I have not done it. Yeah, just a standard doctor, not a hormone doctor.
I can't remember if I talked about this in the previous episode, but I would say that suboptimal thyroid function is massively underdiagnosed. There may be a conspiracy around it because when you don't give someone a simple thyroid replacement, which you can get from an animal glandular that should be available very cheap, suddenly they require like half a dozen prescription drugs for the rest of their life, depending on exactly what their symptoms are. So some of the more common symptoms of low thyroid functions, kind of the stuff I just talked about earlier, digestive issues, so they can sell them antacids, immune system issues, so they can sell them antihistamines. The thing with digestive issues, I guess, would be selling antibiotics, skin issues, so they can sell all these kind of skincare products, hormonal issues, so they can sell men Viagra, weight issues, where they can sell these days Ozempic. In the past, it used to be amphetamines back in the 60s and 70s. Oh, high cholesterol is the number one blood marker that is associated with hypothyroidism and has been for over 100 years. And it used to be when someone had high cholesterol, they would give them thyroid because thyroid converts cholesterol into your other hormones that you actually need, like progesterone and testosterone and DHEA and all that stuff. And now what they do is they reduce the cholesterol, which they say is good with things like statins, but that means that then there's less cholesterol available to convert into the hormones so there's a problem where not enough cholesterol is turning into things you actually need. And rather than helping the conversion, they give you something that reduces the cholesterol. Completely crazy. But anyway, there's so many things like that, which would all be resolved if you just supported the person's thyroid a little bit. And immune system is definitely one of those. I have absolutely seen people, I don't know about lupus, but definitely some autoimmune conditions and many allergies that just disappear once a person has their thyroid supported. because again, the immune system is considered a luxury function by the body, in the sense that when you are running or fighting for your life, immune system function goes down to basically zero, right? As far as it's concerned, they can live without it. And this is where often people have chronic infections for years and years, because the body's like, I'm not dealing with that right now. That's, we can deal with that later if it becomes serious. We'll just leave it for now. So when you give your body enough energy, so we talked about mitochondrial function, one of the reasons why the mitochondria are not functioning, that is hardly ever talked about, is because they're not getting the signal from the glandular system to make enough energy. And that signal is called T3 or free T3 in blood tests. And so if you look at your blood test with free T3, you want your free T3 to be right at the top of the range. I can almost predict how someone's going to feel in terms of there's all kinds of other factors, like we just talked about genetics, like you're naturally a calmer person, for instance. But in terms of the level of enthusiasm and joy someone has, if their T3 is the bottom end of that reference range, they're not going to have much. They may be stressed, they may be crabby or something, but they're not going to be joyful. If their T3 is at the top end of that reference range, they're going to be joyful. They're going to be enthusiastic. And obviously, if they're in the middle, it's in the middle. So T3 to me is as much associated with emotions, feeling good, as anything. Like testosterone is related to confidence, oxytocin is related to love, all these different things, right? So for me, thyroid is related to joy and enthusiasm, like an overflowing exuberance of energy. And so a lack of it, and so when a person has a lack of T3, it can show up in usually one of two ways. Either it can show up as like fatigue, or it shows up in the person being very adrenalized, like angry, stressy kind of thing. And it sounds like if you're not the angry, stressy type, according to your genetics and what you've told me, it's going to be more likely to show up in fatigue.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I would also definitely recommend seeing a doctor. Again, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm recommending to go to someone for medical advice, but I'm saying, the way they say get a second opinion when it comes to doctors, that they don't all agree. Go to a doctor who specializes in hormonal optimization, because a normal doctor will look at your hormones and go, if I don't do anything about this, will this person still be alive in 20 years' time? And the truth is, if your thyroid function is really low, you can scrape by another 40, 50 years of life. It's not going to kill you. It's just going to massively reduce the quality of your life when the thyroid function is low. Now, I know lupus is considered a serious medical issue, but they just don't make that connection. Worst case scenario, it will not help the autoimmunity, but you'll still have more energy, you'll still have more enthusiasm, your immune system will otherwise feel better, your digestion will otherwise be better, your skin will otherwise be better, your sex drive will be higher, it's easier to be the right weight. I mean, there's so many other benefits to thyroid. And I'm saying this for you, Holly, but I'm also saying it for everyone listening. And women are 3 times more likely to have thyroid issues than men, because estrogen, which tends to be higher in women, opposes thyroid. And common symptoms are feeling cold a lot, low energy, digestive issues, skin dryness, constipation, allergies, frequent infections, low sex drive, and either weight gain, or in minority people, it's the other way around, where they actually become too thin. But like generally not a lot of strong muscle mass, because that is energy expenditure, which a lot of the time they don't have the energy.
That all makes total sense. We're talking about thyroid, but where does the hypothalamus come into this conversation?
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and interrupt the program for just a hot minute. You know that I'm so passionate about this podcast, but what I'm also really passionate about is helping women with lupus minimize their symptoms, boost their energy so that they can indulge in life again. So if you are a woman who is struggling with lupus, who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, who's struggling to manage your flares, if you're finding that your lupus symptoms are just really getting in the way of you being able to live your life the way you want to, I feel you. I've been there myself and I felt the same way. And what I've found is that there are a certain set of health fundamentals that, once applied, will support you in your foundational health. They will support you in building and maintaining that energy, minimizing flares, and allowing you to, again, indulge in life and follow your passions. So if that is something that you are interested in creating for yourself, let's jump on a call together. I will walk you through the process that I use with my clients to get them from sick and tired to strong foundation of health by implementing my Health Bridge protocol. If this is something you're interested in chatting more about, I would love to talk to you. Apply for a free clarity call with me, and I look forward to getting to know you soon. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, so the pituitary and the hypothalamus work together. They create a bunch of hormones which are kind of usually the first signaling hormones. So there's the HPTA axis, right? The hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, and adrenals. And the hypothalamus, is the very top of that signaling tree. So it creates, like, for instance, I think in terms of thyroid, hypothalamus creates something called thyrotropin releasing hormone. And then the pituitary creates TSH, and then the thyroid creates the T4, and then the liver converts it to T3. It's like a complicated system. But yeah, why do you ask? It's probably
Right after we did our previous episode, I did one with Deborah Maragopoulos. I think I'm saying her name. And she specializes in hormones, specifically starting with the hypothalamus and the whole trickle down. I'm just curious if focusing on supporting that hypothalamus function, which then supports all the other, that trickle down effect of hormones, will that in turn help to support the T3?
100% it will help to support it. Yes. I agree with her without knowing any more than what you just said, that the hypothalamus is at the root of things. And often it is emotional dysregulation and trauma and all these kind of things, but not just that, also infections, also toxins. There's this thing where the lymphatic system, which is the sewage system of the brain, as it were, doesn't work correctly. And it actually, your body ends up pumping toxins the wrong way up into your brain. And most of the brain is protected from those toxins, except for the hypothalamus, which doesn't have the same blood-brain barrier because it has to get the feedback from the hormones from the rest of the body. But unfortunately, because the signals from the hormones can get through, a lot of the toxins can also get through. So then the toxins can completely dysregulate the hypothalamus. A bad light environment can dysregulate the hypothalamus. Toxins can dysregulate the hypothalamus. Trauma can dysregulate it. Stress in the person's daily life. Like, there's lots of things that can dysregulate it, unfortunately. And so, yeah, fixing the hypothalamus is ideal. The challenge is, I don't know if she said it was easy, but generally it's quite difficult. And so often in the intermediary, if my goal is to just help people rather than be a kind of theoretical purist, I do encourage people to supplement the hormones that the body is not making optimal amounts of while you are fixing it at a root cause level.
Yeah. She definitely didn't claim it was easy. It's a long process for sure.
Right.
Long process.
But a very worthwhile one, again, without knowing her system. Like, I'd say fixing the hypothalamus is a very laudable goal and is kind of a root cause thing to address. Absolutely. But yeah, because it is generally difficult, I don't encourage someone to wait for that. I encourage them. And some things just happen with age is the other thing. Not so much thyroid, but if you're, let's say, a 55-year-old woman, or even 55-year-old man, to be honest, you're never going to have the levels of DHEA, growth hormone, testosterone, progesterone as you would as a 25-year-old, even if your hypothalamus is optimal condition. And then you got to ask the question, do I want to kind of cheat nature and support myself having like a level of hormones that makes me feel like I'm a healthy 25-year-old, or do I just want to accept that I'm declining as I age? And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to that. I mean, it's fair enough, right? Someone just wants to go along with the cycles of nature and let the decline happen. But if you're interested in optimizing and all that, then, or just fixing a problem which is plaguing you, which was certainly my motivation when I started, and it might be yours, then I try not to be a purist about it and just say, what can I do to feel better now that's not going to ruin everything, right? I mean, obviously, feeling better now is a slippery slope because you could probably take like methamphetamine and feel better now, but the problem is how you're going to feel tomorrow morning, right? So that's not a good idea. But for things like taking thyroid, if it's done the right way, taking progesterone or whatever. These are things that are pretty harmless. If you stop them in a sensible way, your body, not only is it possible to get off them and be okay, it's actually sometimes you're more likely to feel okay when you're off them, because by giving your body thyroid for a while, let's say a year or two, all these systems in your body that have been struggling for God knows how long because they haven't had enough energy can start to come back online again because you're supporting your body and having enough energy. Then you can wean yourself off it, and the body now has recovered enough to make its own. Just the idea that it's fundamentally a bad idea, I think, is not proven by either the scientific research or people's clinical experience. A lot of these practitioners who help people with this, as I said, I partner with one who does it on a regular basis. Yeah, I understand why people are against all that kind of stuff, and it's fair enough. But to me, if the goal is to feel better as quickly as possible and resolve the root cause of the problem, it can make sense to support yourself with these various things.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. And so in terms of hormones, there's nothing else that I'm seeing. So now we're in the digestive area, because you said that was of interest to you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, there's quite a few things. You've got 15 things here that are digestion related, but a lot of them are kind of indirectly. Interesting there, it says genetic tendency for lower levels of bifidobacteria. So that was my guess as to why a lot of time people can't handle lactose. I mean, it's hardly essential, but if you ever did one of those like stool biome or I don't know, like bacteria tests, it'd be interesting to see if you do have bifidobacteria. That might well be why you're good with dairy now. So yeah, like a higher risk of C. diff infection, more likely to have gallstones, more likely to have...
There's a history in my family, in the women in my family, having the gallbladders removed.
Okay. All right, that definitely is something worth paying attention to. More likely to have ulcers as well. There's a big stress component to ulcers, so given that you don't have that, you're probably at a lower risk for that, and I assume you haven't had any of those yet. Yeah, good. Yeah, probably very unlikely. But yes, gallstones. Okay, so this, from my perspective, usually comes about as a result of something else called cholestasis. Let's see if you also have high risk for that in the liver category. And there's obviously recommendations in the report specific for you for how to prevent it. But I would say good general recommendations is, first of all, make sure you have the nutrients, which will prevent it happening. I ended up with cholestasis and gallbladder issues, which luckily I called before I had to have it removed. But it was all ultimately just down to deficiency of a particular nutrient, in my case called choline, but there's like a handful that could be the issue. So we'll definitely look at nutrition next. Just see if you have that risk of cholestasis. No, not seeing that. Okay. Low ability to detoxify as well overall. That's interesting. Do you find you're more sensitive to toxicity than, say, your husband or other people around you?
Yeah.
Okay. So this actually, we didn't focus on this yet, but this may be a big deal in terms of another reason. The lymphatic system is both like the body's sewage system, but it's also probably the primary determinant of the health of your body's immune system. It's kind of both. And when a person does have that issue of detox, I do encourage them to look at the lymphatic system. So exercise is good. Things like yoga and all this, I'd say actually not so much. Just walking, running, like that kind of repetitive kind of movement is really good for just getting everything moving, in my opinion. I mean, I guess there's different types of yoga and running and all the rest of it, but just kind of normal movements, I would say, is really good for the lymph. I would say it's worth seeing a practitioner who specializes in lymph just once. Go for something like a lymphatic drainage massage and just ask them what the state is. Ask them if you've got any nodes that are swollen or blocked. Does it look like my lymph is flowing correctly, or does it look like it's not? Because that's a really big determinant for, as I said, the health of your immune system as well. For chronic fatigue, there's this technique actually that's primarily in England. It's called the Perrin technique. And they claim a high success rate of healing people with chronic fatigue. And it's basically mainly just clearing lymph, just doing regular. And the theory behind it is that with people with chronic fatigue, they have this lymph dysregulation where rather than draining, especially the brain of toxins, the pump goes the wrong direction and actually pumps toxins into the brain. And that's why a person seems to be healthy, even according to most blood tests, they all look fine. It's because it's the brain that's being poisoned and no one's biopsying a brain to see how you're doing, right? It's just not done. I think doing a lymph care routine, there's something called like the Big Six, which you can find on YouTube. It's like a 3-minute routine you can do every morning to just go along and clear all of the major lymph channels in your body. Even just shaking your body for a few minutes every morning like that vigorously is really fantastic for lymph. Going for walks is really good for the lymph. But yeah, I would say that's the connection between detoxifying and immunity. That's really big. Maybe it's no big deal for you because you're active and all the rest of it, but it's worth going to a practitioner and having them say, is it a problem for you, I would say.
Okay.
And going back to the gallbladder, that's also important for that. To me, you don't have that tendency for cholestasis in general. The other thing in relation to gallstones, if it's noctural when the bile gets too thick and it forms what they call sludge. In the medical community call it sludge. The alternative health community tends to call it stones, but either way, it's like these green bits. But the really bad form of gallstones are actually they're calcium stones. They're like hard white rocks, and they're the type that you can see in x-rays. And they're usually the type that leads doctors to actually cut your gallbladder out in the end. And they are usually formed of calcium oxalate. And so this relates to something called oxalic acid. Have you heard a guest on talk about oxalates?
Not yet.
Okay. You do have this high risk for oxalate sensitivity, which is genetic. And so it's a good chance that your family members have it as well. And so you might have come across this, right? Because I think there's definitely a contingent in the carnivore community that believe that one of the big benefits of being carnivore is that's a zero oxalate diet. And there's also a contingent among them, I know, that believe that the reason you feel worse sometimes when you go on a carnivore diet is because your body starts dumping oxalates, right? It starts clearing them out. So oxalates it says oxalate sensitivity. So it's not an allergy. It's nothing to do with your immune system in this case. What it is, oxalates are basically a poison, a toxin that's naturally in food. What they actually are is like sharp, stabby crystals. If you Google oxalate and then click on Google Images, you'll see it's like glass shards. And they'll just tear apart anything they touch. And the liver and the gallbladder are part of that detoxification process. And so they're going to be dealing with a lot of that oxalate. And one of the ways that your body protects itself from oxalate is to bind it to calcium. In fact, it often comes bound up with calcium in food, like spinach is a very high oxalate, and a lot of it is bound to calcium. So the body does the same thing, it binds it to calcium. But those calcium oxalate stones are what we call the classic gallstones, and also kidney stones, the agonizingly painful kidney stones. And so it's possible that's one of the other reasons why you're feeling better. Oxalate sensitivity can be a really big deal. As I said, you'll probably be able to find a person to be a guest who believes that oxalates are like the cause of all disease. It's a really big deal.
I know some of those people.
Okay, there you go. So again, I think almost everyone overblows their thing, right? But for some people, it is a big deal, and genetics play a big part of that. It's just a fact that some people's genetics are better at handling different poisons than others. And I don't think I've met anyone who's good at handling every poison, but you can see here, you've got a bit of a list. So your body's not as good at handling mold in food. It's not as good at handling oxalates. It's not as good as handling pesticides. Mold is generally found only in plant foods. Oxalate is only found in plant foods. Pesticides obviously could be both, but if you're eating clean meat, then generally it's more found in plants because obviously you need pesticides to grow plants. You don't need it to raise animals if they're just eating grass or whatever. Organophosphates are, again, herbicides. So you use more with plants. Yeah, so this could be another reason you start to feel a lot better and everything started healing on a carnivore diet, even though you're okay with carbs, as we talked about earlier, in theory, because of all these other poisons that you weren't having, which are to you poisons. And as I say, oxalate is innately poisonous. Mold and mycotoxins are innately poisonous. Pesticides are innately poisonous. However, to some people, they're no big deal because their body just is able to detoxify them a lot better. So I would say if you're going back into eating the plants, that's great. And it sounds like the examples you gave are probably lower in all these things, but you may want to keep it that way. Like I would avoid spinach, I would avoid chocolate, I would avoid tea in the case of oxalates. I guess I would eat organic food. I guess everyone says that. And I'd also avoid the things that are classically moldy. I guess some fruits come in that category. Like, I don't think I've ever bought a pallet of raspberries that didn't have at least one moldy raspberry.
I know.
It always seems to be bad. And I guess cheese is moldy sometimes. So it's not like you can never eat brie, but I guess if you start eating every meal, a lot of the autoimmunity might come back again, because it's just, a lot of it is just the toxic burden that your body has to deal with on a day-to-day level. I mean, there's a few factors. The system that I teach in a nutshell is genetic factors, nutritional. Oh, we'll do that before we finish if you've got time. Nutritional things. Is your body low in nutrients? Is your body overloaded with too many toxins? Are your hormones out of balance? Is your lifestyle out of balance? Like, are you hardly sleeping or whatever? Do you have some kind of chronic infection? And is there some kind of emotional, psychological issue? Those are the 7 root causes of all chronic disease that I see. And so it's always a combination of those things, I would say, that are root causes. So I think I've touched on a few of those, right? I've talked about thyroid for you, talked about the lymphatic system. We've talked about these different toxins and poisons. So yeah, let's look at nutrients. Oh, so in terms of gallbladder, did I answer that? I would say if you're on a really low oxalate diet, which it sounds like you're already on, you probably don't have to worry about it. I imagine those family members probably were not on a low oxalate diet, because most people aren't. But I imagine they're probably actually on a high oxalate diet. I'm amazed at how many people I see who have that oxalate sensitivity, and then they tell me like their staple foods are like chocolate, tea, and spinach. I'm like, I understand the chocolate and tea because they're both a little bit drug-like that make you feel good. But why are all these people eating so much spinach? There's not even like anything that great about it.
I don't know. I used to eat a ton of spinach, but luckily I actually cut that out a while ago, because it's like I hit my limit with it. I OD'd on it, and like I have not wanted it ever since. It's been like 10 years.
Interesting. Good. That's good. But you tell women not to eat chocolate. Some of them, they really don't like it. But it sounds like you already overcame that.
I've never really been a big chocolate fan either. My mom is allergic to it, so that could also be part of the oxalate thing. And so we never really had it around the house, and I never developed a taste for it. I'll have some chocolate here and there now. I can appreciate dark chocolate, but I've never craved it.
I think it's partly the oxytocin maybe as well. I think it has something called phenylethylamine, which is it's the same chemicals you feel when you're in love. So I think there's like a connection that makes people feel loved a lot of the time. And I think they think it's because their parent used to give it to them or whatever, and I'm sure there's that factor, but it also does stimulate certain neurotransmitters that make you feel loved. So I think if you have high oxytocin, you just don't feel any need for it, maybe.
I like that theory.
It's possible. Okay, so interestingly, with nutrients, so we can see at the top, since I have high levels of sodium, I'm not worried about that at all. That doesn't mean you need more. That just means that your levels tend to be higher in your blood. But again, I don't believe that's to be a problem.
I kind of intentionally do high sodium now. Since being carnivore animal based, I've increased my sodium levels, and I find that I really need like the electrolytes.
Yeah, as I said, I wouldn't worry about that tendency for them to be high at all. Personally, it's just it's a piece of information. I wouldn't do anything with it. The big thing jumps out at me here is this one: tyrosine and phenylalanine. Those are 2 amino acids. Phenylalanine is considered to be essential. Tyrosine is not, because your body can make it out of phenylalanine. I've never actually seen someone who has an increased need for both. I have an increased need for tyrosine. And I can tell you, I test my amino acids regularly, and I had to take so much extra supplemental tyrosine on top of the high protein diet I was already having before I finally showed that I had enough tyrosine in my system. And I've seen that in a few clients as well. There's a real correlation there. I'd love for you to test it as well, Holly, but it's a luxury test. It's not exactly essential, but if you ever do, I'd be interested to hear your feedback. But okay, why should you care? Why does this matter? Your body takes phenylalanine and makes tyrosine. Now, then it takes tyrosine and it makes 3 very important class of compounds. Number 1 is melanin, which is skin pigment, but it also has a very interesting and still kind of elucidated role in actually the process of creating energy. It's actually a lot more involved in energy production than we originally thought, and that's still being kind of discovered. But I won't focus on that. I'll focus on the other 2. It's also a building block for catecholamines. So it's dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So these are the stress, but also energizing neurotransmitters. It's very hard to have high energy without those. And the specific feelings of kind of joyful motivation. I said joyfulness comes from thyroid, which is true, but that kind of drive and passion and those kind of words, they come more from dopamine. And then last, the third thing that's made out of tyrosine that's of interest is thyroid hormone. And when I see a person who has an increased need for tyrosine and phenylalanine, they almost always are suffering in all of those areas. Sometimes it's pigmentation issues, like I had a little bit of vitiligo, for instance. I see people with that sometimes when they have low tyrosine. But more commonly, it is low thyroid. Like I see that again and again. It's funny, I had a naturopathic doctor on a little while ago because we bonded over the idea. I was like, you're the first person I read if you noticed when people need more tyrosine, they always seem to have an underactive thyroid. And she's like, I know, you're the first person I've noticed who has noticed that. So I say that to say this is not mainstream science. This is not like recognized that a tyrosine deficiency will lead to thyroid issues. Like it is recognized that an iodine deficiency can lead to thyroid issues. That was the whole kind of thing about goiter and stuff like that. That was like 100 years ago. People would have these big swollen thyroids because they're iodine deficient, which is why they then regulated that you had to add iodine to salt. That's where iodized salt comes from. So iodine they know about, but tyrosine they don't. But I see this again and again. And so it's actually possible that you don't need any thyroid hormone. It's actually possible you might start feeling a lot better if you just have tyrosine. And I know that sounds crazy. I don't think I talked about it last time, but I am amazed. I have some clients come back to me whose life is changed just by supplementing an amino acid that they have an increased need of. The one that I'll tell you about just quickly, because he was a client, but he volunteered to do a video interview for my channel because he said, I want to share this with people. He'd had chronic anxiety for 40 years. He had agoraphobia, which meant he could barely leave the house. He said he'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in all kinds of things, from therapies to body work to ayahuasca ceremonies, like just from the most mainstream to the most extreme to the full gamut of every type, and nothing had really helped. And I saw he had an increased need for an amino acid called glycine, which is a calming anti-anxiety amino acid. As soon as he started taking it, he felt 50% better within a couple of weeks. He just couldn't believe it. So what I've just said for glycine, I'm happy to share that because, as I said, he shared it publicly. Tyrosine is not a million miles different, but in the opposite direction. So whereas lack of glycine produces that anxiety, I can't relax, lack of tyrosine produces that lack of energy. Mm-hmm. Tyrosine is a really an energizing amino acid. Even very mainstream people like Andrew Huberman, I mention this too often in my podcast, but it just blew my mind. He said, I drink coffee every morning. I sometimes have tyrosine, but I sometimes don't because I find tyrosine too stimulating. And I was always like, but coffee is a drug. Tyrosine is an essential nutrient. Like, surely you put the tyrosine first. Like, have tyrosine every morning and then add coffee if that's not enough. Like, why have the coffee and not the tyrosine? It's too stimulating. But that's me. Like, I would absolutely recommend having a good amount of tyrosine. And I say good amount, try 500 milligrams or maybe even less to start with to make sure that it isn't overstimulating. But given that it sounds like you don't have a tendency to go into jittery anxiety or whatever, you could easily have 1 gram, 2 gram, maybe even 3 grams a day. And I'd recommend having it earlier in the day because it is energizing. You'll find a level where you'll start to feel a lot more energy. And look, your fatigue could be something really complicated like mitochondrial dysfunction, which honestly is not very easy to overcome, although it's possible. But it could be something devastatingly simple like an amino acid deficiency. Is definitely possible. So have you tried tyrosine before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. You might have had a little bit, like if you had a thyroid supplement or an energy supplement, sometimes they put like a few 100 milligram. But yeah, like having a dedicated amount, having like loads. As I said, like I calculated in my diet, I was having about 15 grams a day from food. And this might be another reason that you feel better on a high meat diet, by the way, because you're getting more tyrosine. Then when I tested, it still showed I was deficient. And so I was having to have a high meat like protein diet and 5 grams of tyrosine a day before I started to feel better with my genetics. And I only have the one, the tyrosine. You also have the increased need for phenylalanine, which is the building block of tyrosine. So I can't imagine how much you need to feel well. It may be a lot, but I would start really slowly, increase gradually, just so it isn't overstimulating. But yeah, you might be surprised at how much of a difference that makes. So that's a big headline for nutrients. That can make a big difference. And it's probably something that no one has ever told you, because hardly anyone focuses on the amino acids. But they are super, super important. They're like the building block of all your DNA and all the rest of it. It's crazy how important they are. And quickly, increased need for vitamin E. This can sometimes help with hormonal issues. It's an antioxidant, can lower prolactin. And prolactin is a hormone that makes you kind of demotivated. It lowers your dopamine. So that's worth considering as well. I wouldn't expect it to be as impactful, but maybe supplementing vitamin E makes more sense, especially, honestly. Are you having fish on your carnivore diet?
I will eat fish. I don't buy it often.
Okay. So yeah,
but yeah, I don't get it very much.
There's not a lot of vitamin E in like a beef and chicken, that kind of things. There's more in, honestly, plant foods like nuts and seeds, and then there's more in like fish. So if your diet is low in it and you have an increased genetic need for it, that's when between those two, supplementation can potentially make sense, if that makes sense. If you have one or the other, you don't have to supplement. Like if you don't have much vitamin E in your diet, but you don't have genetic need for it, you're probably okay. If you have a high genetic need for it, but you got plenty in your diet, you're probably okay. But if both factors going on, that's where it's worth considering.
And I'm seeing the high increased or the increased need for the omega-3. That kind of goes along with that too, right?
It also indicates fish may be good. Yeah. And I personally, I mean, I think I still sell them on my site, but I tell people these days, from the research I've seen, omega-3 supplements are a last resort. Like if you can get fish, is definitely better. Like the stuff that comes with it and just the freshness of it, and omega-3 goes rancid so quickly. So yeah, if you can, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be sardines in a tin. Sardines in a tin can be cheap. They tend to be low in toxins because they're very low down the food chain, and they're full of nutrients. So
I have them in my cabinet, and I just never think to eat them.
Fair enough.
I'll eat them today.
As long as you like them, right? I don't want to try and get anyone to eat anything they don't like, but yeah.
I'm okay with them. I just forget to eat them. Like I don't crave it, so I don't think about it.
Okay. Try it. Salmon is one of my, I don't eat salmon, but just nutritionally, it's one of my favorite foods because it's so packed full of nutrition, including vitamin E and omega-3s. And then, yeah, just the last one I'll focus on is this one, potassium. So I've seen some statistics saying up to 99% of people are potassium deficient. And I think there's some validity to that. They used to say magnesium is the number one mineral everyone's deficient in, but I think potassium's taken over these days because a lot of people supplement magnesium now. So potassium is, essential. I mean, it's electrolyte. It's essential for all these basic functions in the body. It tends to be especially low in a carnivore diet, and it tends to be especially high in fruit. If you're now eating plenty of fruit, I would not worry about it. But if you or anyone listening, you don't eat fruit, you don't eat potatoes, coconut, water, anything like this, if you're eating a low potassium diet, and a lot of people, I do often a nutritional analysis these days where we put all their foods in and we look at all the nutrients that they're needing and a chronometer. And I have to admit, unless someone's eating a lot of potatoes or fruit, I see that they're almost always low in potassium. Like they're not even meeting the government recommended amount, let alone an amount that might be optimal for them. An easy solution to that is to get something called low salt, which is basically, instead of putting salt in your food, you get stuff called low salt. It's like in a salt shaker, and it's basically just half sodium chloride, half potassium chloride. So it's just putting some potassium in there as well, basically. And
I have that. Only I thought it was no salt. Is there a low salt and a no salt?
Oh, probably, yeah.
Okay.
If it's got some potassium chloride.
Yeah.
Okay. But if it's all potassium, then great. But you want some sodium as well, as you said, right? So just a bit of both.
Yeah. So I've been creating an electrolyte drink basically in the morning with, right now I have pink Himalayan salt. So I'm doing like half of that and half of the no salt, the potassium.
Fantastic. All right. So you're already on it again. That's perfect. And some people do say that it really helps them fatigue. Some people really say that it helps them with chronic pain because it helps to relax the muscles. Some people say it really helps with digestive issues. And it's one of those things. It's one of the main building blocks of the body. So if you're low in it, like it's hard to tell because there's a million different ways your body could go wrong. It's hard to even identify it. But as you said, like cramps and fatigue, I'd say would probably be the most stereotypical kind of signs.
Yeah, for me, I tend towards muscle twitches and muscle cramps. I found the one magnesium that really works.
Which form?
It's from, oh shoot, what is it called? Upgraded Formulas. Are
Okay.
you familiar with that brand? It's like the ionic form. So it's not like glycinate, it's not citrate.
Oh,
It's
like nanoparticles, like small
yes,
particles. Yeah. Okay.
yes.
Got it. Yeah. Awesome.
Fabulous. So I do that every day, and that's like the one supplement that if I run out of, I kind of freak out because I know
Mm,
I'm going straight into muscle twitches. Um,
interesting.
yeah. So that lots of water, obviously, and then stress is the other trigger.
So there's not a genetic basis for needing more magnesium, but this is just a thing where, again, most people's diets are just low in it these days, unfortunately. Yeah. And as you said, stress, as you said, your personality is obviously not stressy, but the body can still be under stress. Toxins can still put the body under stress. A chronic infection can still put the body under stress, no matter how calm the person is otherwise in the
Yeah.
way that they are. It's really important to be aware of all of that stuff. And I know I've recommended a bunch of tests. I'll just throw one more in there. Maybe a test for toxicity, given that your detox capacity was fairly low. A good one is either lipid peroxides or 8-OHDG. These are kind of functional medicine tests. The kind of classic liver enzymes that a normal MD does, they kind of, you have to be pretty bad before those are elevated usually. And sometimes they're elevated for no good reason as well. So it's not very reliable. But doing one of those tests that I just said is like a better indicator to see if your liver is like in the early signs of struggling.
Okay. Awesome. This has been so much great information. And I hope that people listening too have really gotten a lot out of it just in seeing the information that they can really draw from this with a practitioner that can take a look at these and kind of understand it from the genetic standpoint, as opposed
Yes,
to somebody that's used to only looking at blood work or something like that, right?
absolutely. And I recommend blood work. I've recommended half a dozen probably in here, right? As like a
Mm-hmm.
follow-up to test. I'm
Yeah.
definitely not against that, but I just think this is a good starting place because, I mean, as you said, like it's overwhelming when you look at all the reports, but the reality is most practitioners have a very, what's the word? They only look at a small spectrum of all the things that could be going. Let's say you go to a different practitioner with fatigue, right? You go to a chiropractor and they say it's your spine. You go to MD and they just see if you're anemic. You go to, you know what I mean? Like there's every practitioner will see it through their own specific lens and their own narrow, broad wavelength. But the reason is there's so many things it could be. Like over 100 of these 500 reports could all be the root cause of fatigue. There's so many potential issues. No, like narrowing it down for any kind of generalized issue, like I'm overweight or I'm depressed or I have chronic pain or I have fatigue or I have chronic infections. Like there's so many different things it could be. It's hard to even know where to start. And if you've got a huge budget, then immediately you can go to a functional medicine practitioner and they can order thousands and thousands of dollars worth of tests. And hopefully in amongst all that, they'll find what's going on. And a really good one, obviously, but it doesn't matter how good you are or how experienced you are, you can miss things. And I say that from personal experience. That's how I found this. I went to see a lot of very good practitioners and none of them guessed what was going on with me because what was going on with me was pretty obscure. You know, it's just was not common and I didn't have the classic signs and all the rest of it. And it took me seeing the genetics to go, could it actually be that? And who knows, maybe we've done that with you today. As I said, you could go to probably 100 practitioners, not one of them would tell you that the root cause is a tyrosine deficiency. I'm not saying that it is, but I'm saying it could be. No one else is going to tell you that. It literally costs you like $10 for a pound of powder. And if you happen to be lucky, like that other client that I mentioned did with the glycine, like you could resolve like a 40-year problem with like a $10 bag of powder. I mean, it's certainly not guaranteed, but it's possible. And unfortunately, it's only a system like ours, which has an overwhelming amount of information that can actually include all the things it could be, including the thing that it actually is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think what all that sums up to me is like to tell our listeners, don't give up hope. You know, like don't give up hope in your journey of like if you are stuck, especially in the autoimmune world, and you're dealing with all these things, it seems extremely complicated. Everybody has a different theory on what's going on. Nothing seems to be helping. your MD thinks you're crazy and they're gaslighting you, like there still could be a simple answer. It's like I actually heard a story almost identical to the one you shared about your client, that it was just that one little thing. Almost the same scenario from another guest that I had on. His client was going through this through psychiatry and trying to work on his anxiety and all this stuff, agoraphobia. After years, nothing. And he was trying everything that was recommended to him. Finally, he found out that he was celiac. 50% better or more as soon as he
just stop eating gluten. Yeah. It's so simple.
Yeah. And again, that brings me also back to like your autoimmune disease. Okay, so you have lupus, but that doesn't mean that you are handcuffed to all of these symptoms. Some of these symptoms are affected by a million different things. So if we can identify certain things in your diet, nutrient deficiencies or lifestyle things, all these different causative things, you might still have lupus at the end of the day, but your symptoms or your flares might be way lessened if we can figure out how to support the body in the right way or remove things like toxins or whatever in the right way. And then, you have lupus, but you're still able to thrive.
And I think it depends on your definition of cure. I remember coming across this with diabetes, because there's an argument between the mainstream and the alternative health community about type 2 diabetes. Is it possible to cure it? The mainstream community says it's absolutely not possible to cure it. And the alternative community says actually it absolutely is possible. And I think it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It depends on your definition of cure. Because the mainstream's definition of cure in the case of diabetes is you can go right back to eating the terrible way that you did before and not have a problem. And so that's not possible. So from their definition, they're right. There is no cure. But the alternative perspective is actually, if you just clean up your diet and eat the right way and do maybe a bunch of other stuff, whatever is necessary, then you can live a life that's just fine and you won't have raised blood sugar and you won't need to be on insulin. So as far as they're concerned, there is a cure. And so it's just a matter of perspective. And I think autoimmunity, honestly, is the same way in my experience. Did we talk about LDN? Low dose naltrexone?
Briefly, but
last time.
Talk about it again. Yeah, talk about it again.
I mean, low dose naltrexone is an example of something that, as far as I am aware, there is loads and loads of examples of people who are completely cured when they take it of autoimmunity. I think it's LDN Network or something like that. There's a website there's several books about it as well. And it's just filled with different practitioners. The book's filled with different practitioners sharing their success using LDN in different fields. I came across it because I had a good friend who was a client who had Hashimoto's. So I was looking at how to help with that. And I discovered it's highly effective for Hashimoto's, but it's actually highly effective for a bunch of other autoimmune diseases as well. And it does it by modulating the endorphin system. It's a whole other thing that we haven't even talked about today. Controlled by the pituitary and the hypothalamus, to go back to that conversation. And so I won't go into all how it works. I guess the point is to just echo your point. A person can go to having zero symptoms after low dose naltrexone. And so that tells me that autoimmune diseases are potentially curable, as long as your definition is, if I eat healthy and do the right things, I can have zero symptoms. And I think that absolutely is doable. As I said, I've experienced it myself, like with Hashimoto's. There's loads of case studies of people who have. Obviously, it doesn't mean every case can be better. I don't know that. Obviously, it is case by case. But in terms of hope, 100%. It's like the immune system is not attacking its own tissues for no reason. There's something going on that's dysregulating it. And that goes back to the genetic thing. If someone has a heavy basis for that in their genetics, then it is possible that they're never going to be 100% fully better, because unfortunately they're just born that way. And that is where it is useful to see if that's the case. But for someone like yourself, I don't see any strong indications of that. So to me, it tells me that I believe that the reason why the immune system becomes so dysregulated is because it's lacking in nutrients, it's lacking in energy, it's maybe been dysregulated by some kind of usually chronic, sometimes acute infection, but most importantly of all, it's dysregulated by massive toxic exposure. And that's where a lot of people are blaming the jab schedule for these days, and why there's a massive increase in autoimmunity in relation to that. My mother was against that, and I had 0 jabs, and I still was not super healthy. So I'm not claiming that is the be all and end all of anything, but I think it's this issue of toxic load. There's a certain amount of toxicity that the body can cope with before systems start really failing. And that load is different between different people. It can even be different between you and your brother and sister, because there's like different genetics, right? So someone like yourself who has that genetic where they're not particularly good at dealing with a lot of toxicity, it's going to be not that difficult to get to that level where it's just too much and systems start failing. And again, if your definition of cure is I can go back to living a toxic lifestyle, toxic food and smoking and whatever and be fine, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But if you can get that toxic load down enough, you can and heal the body with whatever else is required. I do believe you can get your body to a place where your immune system is functional enough again that it stops attacking its own tissues and that you're basically symptom free.
Yeah, I completely 100% agree with you. And it's on so many levels. I think people that have the definition of I just want to go back to living how I was, that's, I don't know, there's that opening up of the perspective. You were kind of talking about the practitioners who are so specialized in their one thing, they have kind of the blinders on to the other things. They just don't see it. All of these health issues are an invitation to opening up the blinders, seeing how life can actually be, inviting personal growth on physical, mental, spiritual levels. And yeah, I think it's there to teach us something, and it's there to teach us how to communicate with ourselves better, how to listen to ourselves better, how to communicate with our higher power better, and live more intentionally in how we were physically built to live in relationship with the environment. We're in these constructed environments now that are so different than we were in 100, 200,000 years ago. And we can't understand that just because our brains have evolved to where we can create all these things, it doesn't necessarily mean it's that our bodies have evolved to keep up with it in a healthy way.
Definitely not. And people don't, so much changed even the last 60 years, let alone the last 200 years. And there's an explosion of autoimmunity from almost nothing to very common. And it's not a coincidence.
Agreed. Anything else that we should touch on before we close today?
I think I have to go to my next appointment, but thank you so much for sharing. It's been really fun. If anyone's interested in trying Genetic Insights, I guess I should tell them it's geneticinsights.co and use code HEALTHBRIDGE, no spaces, for 25% off our already very low prices.
Yeah, and you do have low prices, and the service is amazing. And this was so much fun. I hope everybody got a lot from this. And thank you, Elwin. Maybe we can do yet another follow-up in the future.
I would love to.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly.
All right, there you go. I'm an open book. I hope that was as interesting for you as a listener as it was for me as the client, so to speak, hearing all about the interpretation of my own genetics test. I've definitely learned several things that I was not aware of, such as the tyrosine, such as some of the different testing, talking about the thyroid and stuff like that. That's always been something that's been pretty bypassed by any doctor that I have seen, and honestly hasn't really come up with any other practitioner either. So I'm really curious to look into further testing and working with some different practitioners on those levels as well. And I'll keep you all posted on it. Maybe we'll do a follow-up with Elwin, just give you some updates with the tyrosine, for example, and some other things that I look into. But I hope that this was very informative for you. Again, I just talked about this at the end of the episode, but I really hope that this does open your eyes to the possibilities that really are out there for leveling up your health, for handling these really hard, deep-rooted conditions that seem like they're just incurable. I don't believe in things being incurable. I think maybe something can't be completely taken away. Like as Elwin said, if you have a genetic tendency for something like an autoimmune disease, sure, perhaps you're not going to completely get rid of it, but could your life be way more livable with that condition, if we were to really dive into this testing and focus your health strategy a little bit differently and a little bit more fine-tuned? Yeah, I think so. I know. I mean, he's seen it in his own practice. I've certainly seen it, maybe not with the genetic testing, but within the different practices that I use and with my clients and with myself, as well as there's many, many other successful practitioners out there that have been able to really guide someone from what their medical doctor said was a lifelong incurable issue that they're just going to have to down pills for, to somebody that has either relieved themselves of the symptoms or has it in a much, much more manageable position to live a good life. So I hope that this just really gives you some positivity and hope in this whole journey of life and this whole process of rebuilding your health. And I would really love to hear from you if and when you do take advantage of this generous discount and get your genetics testing done. Share that with me, share that with Elwin. I'd love to know what you do with that information. So thank you so much. If you are listening on a platform where you can leave a comment, please leave a comment. Tell me what your biggest takeaway was of this. And would also ask that you subscribe and share this podcast with somebody that you think would really resonate with the messages or with this particular episode. That is how we get this out further and get a bigger reach. We don't do any paid advertising or anything like that to grow our following. It's basically all by help from viewers like you. So thank you so much for helping us in that pursuit. And we look forward to having you here again with us on the next episode of the Health Bridge podcast.